So, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today on this Saturday. I'm super happy to have Professor Joe Lulloff with us. Professor Michigan State since what, 1991? Is that right?
Oh yes, yeah, I guess so. That's a long time ago. Yep.
One. Um, I have not had the good fortune to study with him, but several of my friends had, and I've gotten to know you um, that way and been a guest at Michigan State myself. Wonderful teacher, wonderful person, wonderful performer. Please help me welcome Joe Lulloff.
Good to see everybody. Thank you all for having me, and uh, Nathan, thank you so much for first of all inviting me to this wonderful forum that you've created, and thank you for creating this forum. This is just a phenomenal and very I think educational opportunity for all of us, students and teachers alike, to be able to experience people that normally we might not have that opportunity to cross paths with, during our time. And it's a difficult time for all of us, I know, and I hope everybody's safe out there and healthy and practicing a lot and enjoying life as you can. And so we hope that we give you some good information this afternoon and just have a lot of fun chatting. It's been really great to chat with you, Nathan, through these past just several days, and of course over this time. I've really admired your work, and my students loved having you up here. And phenomenal recital last year when you came up, and we have to do more of that.
Well, thank you, thank you. So I thought I would start with, I've been doing this with all the folks we had Q&As with. I gave you a brief intro, but can you give us, let us know who you are. Give us your background and, where you're from, info about your family, how you decided to pursue saxophone, all that.
Oh my, the Joe Lulloff story, I guess. Huh? however it is. Well, I grew up in a suburb of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Uh, it's called Wauwatosa. It's an old Indian name, and it's just west of town of Milwaukee, I should say. And I grew up in the '60s and the '70s, and it was a great time to be involved in that metropolitan area in that part of the country. Lots of wonderful activities, lots of great band programs when I started into music, lots of wonderful arts and inspiring artists coming through Milwaukee. Oftentimes they come through Chicago, just south of Milwaukee by about an hour and a half, and they come up to Milwaukee, maybe play a concert Thursday or night before their Friday, Saturday concerts, or in jazz, or if it was a symphony, the same type of thing. They might do a midweek or even a weekend tour. So it was great to experience that culture. We had, on the classical side, many fine artists will come through the university there. And symphonies. I particularly remember the symphony orchestras, particularly Chicago Symphony, would come up and play concerts on a regular basis in Milwaukee on Monday evenings. And when I was, oftentimes they even did Milwaukee Symphony, and even once in a while Chicago Symphony did a school show back in the early '70s, where on a Monday afternoon you go down in a bus downtown into the Performing Arts Center and catch a children's concert. And I think I was in third and fourth grade when I first started seeing my first symphony concert. So that was really pretty special. And the Carnival of the Animals, or that type of music that they would play, or introducing the instruments. And I grew up in a time in Milwaukee in which music education was held in high esteem in that state, in Wisconsin, um, and uh, and band started in fourth grade, if you can believe that.
Mm.
And I don't know what it's like now. I know here in Michigan, it's I think we're probably starting in the sixth grade, and unfortunately, it needs to be earlier. But I actually started saxophone kind of an interesting story. In the second grade, I had a uncle who played the soprano saxophone, and it was 1967, and I had just finished I was at the end of school, and I was having some asthma problems all year, and through allergy tests and whatnot, I was really having some difficulty breathing, and they thought that I needed to expand my lung capacity. And so I had all these breathing exercises and these breathing tubes from the therapist and whatnot. But the doctor said, I've had some patients start musical instruments, and I know Joey's kind of young to do this, but boy, if you could get him a clarinet or a saxophone or even a trumpet. And I was not a small kid. I was pretty good size for 7, 8 years old. And so in the spring of that year, I had an uncle who had a soprano saxophone who was in one of those regional military Air Force bands for a long time. He was in the Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, stationed there, and they sent me up the saxophone. And I first tried clarinet, and the clarinet wasn't my friend. I couldn't cover the holes, And my mom had we had music in our house. My mom played organ casually. She was not a true, accomplished musician, but she enjoyed playing tunes on a console organ, and I'd sit there next to her. I'd go up there, and I used to watch her play the organ, and sometimes play along with her and annoy her and do all the things. And so I think she wanted me to try to get me to get keyboard lessons, but I don't know if I was that interested in it. The saxophone or the clarinet at the time seemed like an interesting idea, and I tried covering the holes of the clarinet and didn't work, and I got in trouble. I wasn't very kind to that instrument. I actually somehow hung it up in the rafters because I was so frustrated with it, and I got in trouble and it got grounded and so on and so forth. But eventually, then I went to the saxophone after my punishment was done. And my asthma was pretty bad, so they thought, well, we'll give you one more chance if you mature and get serious about your practicing. And I did. My mom's organ teacher had a son who was a clarinetist and a saxophonist, and he taught me for several years. And then I graduated. I practiced a lot. I enjoyed practicing that nice shiny silver buffet soprano saxophone. And then I went to alto, and band started in 4th grade. I was involved in some community bands. I really liked playing in band, and because we didn't have band in the school, and I was doing pretty good. So I started music lessons at Casio Music, and I started in Milwaukee, and they, one thing led to another. I got into the Milwaukee Pops community band, and then to Music for Youth, which many people in Milwaukee know about. It's an all-area kind of orchestra and band, and I even got back to the clarinet. Now I could cover the keys, and played a little contrabass clarinet in that orchestra. And started studying with Stan DeRusha, who was the director of bands at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And I went to the Madison Summer Youth Music Clinic there for 6 summers, and that's when I really was able to really understand, particularly my first music clinic experience was, geez, there's all these other, kids, some of my friends and some, all from all over the state, they're really having a great time, and I love playing in band. I mean, to this day, Nate, if there was a Dallas Winds, if there's a Dallas Winds here in East Lansing, Michigan, that I could be a part of, I'd be there at every rehearsal. I would just love it, and I think that's probably why I feel very much a closeness to my band director colleagues and to that medium and to the saxophone, because the band is the saxophonist orchestra, and many of us have heard that, but it's really true. And I think if for me coming up, I was always wanting to be in band even through my last year of graduate school. I was I was always looking forward to wind ensemble, even though I didn't have to be in it. But I stayed with Stand Arusha for 4 years, and I also did a lot of summer music clinics up in, which I think is very important for students to always have that summer project. Unfortunately, this summer we don't have those opportunities, and great to have this forum and others, other online forums for us to take advantage of. But if everybody should have a summer music project, or maybe two or three. And the Great Plains Saxophone Workshop, Brevard, where both of those places I teach, the American Saxophone Academy, the Snow Pond up in Maine, and the institute up there, and Tanglewood. All these great places are really important for us to sort of dive into, and regardless if you just go for a weekend seminar or whatnot. For me, it was life-changing. I really saw other musicians playing at a very high caliber level of experience, and I wanted to be like them, and I wanted to be as good as I could, and of course I wanted to try to be first chair. Who wouldn't want to be first chair? And one summer I got first chair in one of these camps, and then the next summer I came back, I got second chair, and boy was I disappointed in myself. And I practiced and practiced and practiced. It made me practice harder, right? I mean, so maybe I wasn't practicing enough that first summer. I don't know. I think it was a sophomore in high school or something like that, or a freshman in high school. So a lot of times these opportunities that we have really, if we approach it in the right way, and if we're disciplined, and depending on it's very important to be that way. Yeah, of course, it's good to be competitive, but to keep competition in balance with really what is the main purpose and what do we try to do. We need to be the best we can be. What God's given us as far as our talents, we need to share that in the best way possible. And so one of the camps that really stood out for me was Eugene Rousseau's Shell Lake Saxophone Workshop, which Stan Arusha and my mom and dad, who were extremely supportive. I was an only child, so I think if I wasn't an only child, and given on their modest income, I'm not so sure I would have these opportunities. So I always I always am very appreciative to them for their sacrifices in what I was doing. But the Shell Lake Saxophone Workshop was fantastic. I started that when I was in ninth grade, I think it was. No, 10th grade. Yeah, 10th grade, I think. Summer of my 10th, after I was going to be a rising junior. And that summer I met Larry Teal. And he was a guest at the saxophone workshop. And I also met Paul Brody. And then the next summer I met some of the people from Oregon Saxophone Quartet. I'm not sure if they're around anymore, but and all these wonderful, wonderful artists that Dr. Rousseau brought up, along with Ken Fisher, who we all know from the University of Georgia. Unfortunately he's not with us anymore, but he was a graduate student at that time. Fumiyoshi Maezawa from Japan, one of the top Japanese saxophonists he turned out to be after, all of them were graduates or graduating in the graduate school or graduates of Indiana University, which Dr. Rousseau brought up. Yeah. And Jean Lansing, who was at Wichita State for many years as a professor. She was a student there at Indiana. And all these wonderful individuals really shaped me in so many ways. This was what it was like to be a professional saxophonist at that particular time in the early 70s, mid 70s.
Right.
And these great artists like Larry Teal coming in and talking about warm-ups and talking about pedagogy, and I had never heard those terms necessarily in that light before as a 16-year-old. And right. Playing duets with Steve Stusek, who was there with me one summer, and some other people that I could name names, but they're in our profession and doing various things, and it's also and that's the community that I was brought up with, and it stuck with me. Rousseau had such a wonderful way of making everybody feel important, making everybody feel engaged. He was such a kind and gentleman, and he was such an artist. He was his playing and his teaching. He brought such finesse to the instrument and to everything that he did, and I wanted to be like that. And I was very lucky at the point then to go to Michigan State. It was between Indiana and Michigan State and Wisconsin, University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, where Stan DeRusha was. And so, Mr. DeRusha went to Michigan State as the director of bands. As I was about ready to start college, and so I actually followed him there. Indiana was some place I really wanted to go to, but again, it was a financial. Even with scholarship, I wanted to see farther in the future than just a bachelor degree. So I think I mentioned to you before, I really wanted to check out Northwestern with Dr. Hemke.
Yeah.
I had heard so many wonderful things about him. Being so close, it would have been great. I mean, because I used to go to the saxophone shop all the time as a kid and get stuff there and hang out and meet Bobby Black and those guys.
Sure.
Bobby Black was crazy. He was wonderful to visit with and very kind and always tell, okay, you need to go over to Northwestern here and check out this concert coming up.
Right.
Tell your mom and dad just to stay. Tell them you'll get the train home tomorrow. And I'm 17. Sure, I'll do it. But I never had the fortune to study with Dr. Hemke, and I would have loved to. But my path took me to Michigan State, and I'm glad it did. I have no regrets on anything I've ever done in my life. I'm very fortunate to say that. Do I miss things? Do I wish that I could have done some other things? Of course, we all want to do everything, but Michigan State was a special place for me. You ever go to a place and you say, "Man, this just feels like home." Mm-hmm. This really feels like home. And I had no knowledge of anybody there, but it really felt like home for me.
Sure.
And at that time, Lane Zajac was the saxophone professor here for 1 year. She was there for my first year, and she was adjunct, and they were trying to make the saxophone job tenure track. And plans were to make it tenure track the fall of '79. That would have been, fall of '79 would have been my sophomore year. I loved studying with Elaine. She was a great teacher technically, and kind of really honed me in technically with my technique. A funny story about her though. She'd sit there and she'd say, okay, that 8-2's at 132. Why didn't you bring it into me at 138? Why didn't you bring it into me at 144?
Right.
But she had the kindest way of saying it that I didn't feel like she was making me feel horrible.
For sure.
Make me get back into practice from them, And so while she inspired me, I still was missing that musical element sometimes that I wanted to get from people like Rousseau. And I heard about Don Cinta, and I wanted to audition for Cinta. I auditioned for Cinta also when for my undergraduate, but I didn't get in. I got in with Rousseau, and I got in with Michigan State and other places, and that was okay. You know why? Because that just put another goal in front of me.
Sure.
And I was okay with that. And I was like, well, maybe they were looking for somebody else, and I was disappointed, but maybe it was something lacking in what I needed to do. And so I stayed at Michigan State, and of course I was very much into jazz at the time too. I was into jazz ever since growing up in Milwaukee, hanging out. My mom and dad used to go to restaurants. We'd all go out to eat, and they like going to supper clubs. Supper clubs are big in Milwaukee. Dinner clubs, supper clubs, and you'd have a jazz trio oftentimes, or a casual trio of music. Sometimes there was an accordion player. I was around music all the time.
Sure.
My first gigs were 14 years old. My friend who played drums in junior high school, his name was Dale Hunke, and his dad had a polka band, and he needed a saxophonist. So I started gigging at 14 years old all over Milwaukee for $30 a night, $20 a night.
Nice.
At first I was just packing up the band, you know what I'm saying? And then after, I don't know. I made enough money to buy an old Mark VI Barry sax that was old Selmer
Sure.
Barry sax, and at my senior year, so it was good for me. But Michigan State really had, I think, a very fine jazz department back then, and as they do now, they have a great jazz department now. Uh, Back then, Ron Newman did some wonderful things from North Texas State, and Jim Forger came my second year and got the position. And Jim was another one of those types of individuals. And probably you had asked me some questions of who are some of my most influential teachers. Jim Forger, in addition to Dr. Rousseau, who I only had summer contact with,
Right.
and Stan Rusha, who was my high school teacher, who was a phenomenal conductor and conducted every lesson of mine, showed me how to shape a phrase with your conducting, and those people who know me or who've worked with me know that I rely so much on certain kinds of gestures, and maybe that's where I get my movement from. I have no idea, but if you can't express yourself uh, physically, if you can't express the music physically in some way, shape, or form, it's difficult to get that musical point across. So Stan was, and I took even some slight conducting lessons with him, but really, I really found out that Jim Forger really had the voice of the saxophone and the personality of a teacher that I was in awe of, and I stayed there through my master's, and I really had a great experience at Michigan State. I have to say, and the people there, he amassed a saxophone class. My sophomore year, I was in a quartet. I had the opportunity to play in quartet. He amassed a terrific class, small but terrific. Don Fabian was one of the graduate assistants there. Don's at SMU now, for those of you who know who he is. A terrific saxophonist, pedagogue, and doubler. Oh my God, he played piccolo like you wouldn't believe. We'd be in big band, we'd be doing these Rob McConnell big band charts, and they have some really difficult piccolo flute parts, and he would just nail it on sight reading. And I'm like, I'm playing lead alto. I won the lead alto chair as a sophomore, and I'm looking, and he's playing lead tenor. I'm like, how are you doing this? And I remember the second rehearsal, and he says, oh well, I got the music, and the first thing I did was practice it, and he would always get there, 30 minutes before to get his horns out and everything perfect,
Right.
and just another inspiration for me.
Sure.
But Jim was great. Jim taught me so much about musical sound, shaping a phrase, character of music. He has a sound that he can pick up he's our director now, our
Right.
dean of the College of Music, and he can pick up a saxophone right now, and I've seen him do it. We've even played in quartet, some special quartet projects over the past years, and we've gone on tour with Coalgrass Urban Requiem. There's some stuff out on the internet that we've done. He's brought back Tamor Sullivan and Chris Creviston, who's one of our MSU alumni, one of his former students. And Tamor was my student both at Illinois when I taught and here at Michigan State for his master's. And we're playing these difficult quartets. And Jim, he might be on all day in conference calls and that. Come into rehearsal, he makes us feel like we have to go and practice. He sounds so great, so great. Never a bad read, never a bad sound. And I don't say that lightly, and I don't say that because he's my boss. I say that because he's a musician and my teacher who I've admired and I've wanted to be like all my life. Yeah. And I think if we have those heroes, if we have those saxophone heroes, both in classical, jazz, pop, for me, Jim Forger, Stan Rusha, Jean Rousseau, you know, as far as the teachers, the Jean-Marie Londex, who I studied with later in summer camps.
Mm.
If we have them always in our mind when we're playing, how do they sound? How would they shape the phrase? What type of articulation would Jim use here to bring out the character of excitement or of lightness or of you know, so on and so forth, and you know, going back to that, or in jazz for me, Sonny Stitt, you know, Jimmy Heath, Phil Woods certainly, Joe Henderson, my heroes. Those are my heroes in jazz. Thad Jones, Mel Lewis. Sorry for anybody that every once in a while I get on Facebook and I'll post one of my jazz heroes, you know, because I get this thing called jazz on the tube. It's called, and it's a tune a day. You can sign up for it. It's free. I'm not trying to sell anybody anything, but you really want to expand your musical mind. It's a free service from Tivoli, New York. I forgot the gentleman's name, but it's called Jazz on the Tube, and it's fantastic. You can look it up, and I hope well, I can't look it. I'm not going to look it up right now, but make sure I've got the right name. But it inspires me to, you know, reconnect sometimes with some of these great jazz musicians that I've forgotten. But anyways, those are my heroes. Those are the guys that I've enjoyed many years of association with, and that have helped shape
right
thing. And then I was very fortunate. I got into competitions, as some of you know, maybe like anybody else would. We didn't have MTNA back then. We didn't have NASA competition. We had NASA World Saxophone Congresses. It was great. Dr. Hepke did a fantastic one at Northwestern in '79. I met Marcel Mule in the lobby. That was pretty cool. And I was a sophomore. I was that, you know, I had no idea who the heck I was meeting. You know, I just heard him, and I said, oh, and I thought that, and John Nickel, by the way, who John was in school with me as well. John Nickel was with me. We were in a quartet back from my freshman quartet with John. And those of you who don't know John Nickel, he's a professor of saxophone at Central Michigan, and it's probably my closest friend in the world. And he's been my son's godfather and somebody I talk to every day. He's another person that really inspires me. Who we need people to bounce things off every day, because this teaching career, as you all know, can get to be pretty hard down the road for us, you know. But I looked at John and said, "Is that the guy whose name is at the top of all of the music that we play?"
Yeah.
That and this other guy, Sigurd Rascher, and I'm like, yeah. He said, yeah, those are the guys, you know. And Sigurd wasn't there, but he wasn't at that conference. But we didn't have these back to the competitions that we so aspire to, and I'm proud we do now, because these are great goals for us. But you know, I found competitions and goals in some of the local symphonies in Wisconsin to apply for, and as well Concert Artists Guild, Young Concert Artist, and I was fortunate enough to do well in those, and Pro Musicus, and won that in '84, and then had a Carnegie Hall recital in the following year, and that was the year I started at Illinois. And I was at Illinois for 7 years and received tenure there and promotion. I loved it, and I didn't expect the position here at Michigan State to open up until late fall of '90, and I had just gotten tenure, and it got kind of settled into, you know, starting projects after that. Professor Forger called up and said, "How would you like to come up and guest teach?" And I thought it was a master class. "Oh, well, sure, I'd love to come up." And we talked a little bit. He says, "Now, this week, and then this week, and this week." I said, "Hold on a second. What do you mean?" And he says, "Well, I've become an associate dean, and I need some help teaching." So, and then the position opened up, and I applied like everybody else. And in the spring of 1991, I was really fortunate to receive that position. It was a difficult move, very difficult. I still have some very dear friends in Illinois, and that will always remain close to me in my heart. except the football team isn't that good. But I mean,
Right.
although our football team it has been up and down too, but we have a basketball team at least.
Yeah.
But 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 no, Illinois was great. The Cranard Center was great, and so many people there were. That Illinois was a place that really helped me um, define my career to that next level.
Sure.
Well, that's a little bit about me. I'm sorry I went on and on, guys. I hope that I at least, hopefully, not too many people have left us. But you know, if you want to tell your friends if you want to catch it online, you can skip the first
No, that's wonderful.
29 minutes of this.
Two things that stuck out to me actually that connect you directly to both Deborah Rickmeyer and Hemke, which was Deborah started on soprano saxophone when she was young.
She did.
That was her first instrument, and then of course Hemke was from Milwaukee as well.
Yes, Hemke, Fred and I talked about this some time ago. I don't remember where, but he grew up, I think, 2 miles away from my house. And I actually biked by his neighborhood. I just wanted to see where it was, and it's you know, it's just they're on the west side, and yeah, he was there just a few years prior to me.
Yeah. Well, so all right. So you've talked about your background and everything. Now, what about your background as a student and a young professional? Now, what about in terms of teaching? Like, what are some of your most formative experiences? This is a question from Stephen Banks. Most formative experiences as a teacher. Like, what inspired you the most? You know, growth in your students. You know, and then also even formative moments as a performer. So, you know, are there any things that you can define as real, you know, formative moments, I guess?
Well, that's a great question, and thanks, Steve, for asking that, because this is a question that I think I like to ask a lot of my colleagues, and I wish I could have asked, you know, people like Dr. Hemke, you know, who's not with us anymore. I think for me, and I alluded to this earlier, some of the individuals that I grew up with, the Don Fabians, the John Nichols, the Griff Campbells, who was my classmate for 5 years at Michigan State, where he did his master's and doctorate, and of course my teachers, they all provided me strong role models. They provided me guidance where I could see and refer back to what they had suggested to me. I could refer back to that when I'm in the teaching situation, and many times I will. I'll give a lot of thought to you know, certain situations I'm faced with in teaching, and it's not difficult situations. It's just you know, how to handle quartet placements, how to handle you know, quartet blend, or a certain technical problem, you know. And I remember talking to and learning this from, you know, articulation from Don Fabian, and from a wonderful clarinetist, Jim Heffernan, was a student of Elsa Vidaris at Michigan State when I was there, and now I was at the Army Field Band. Jim taught me my concept of articulation, trying to ping the sound a little bit more. And I don't know, maybe that was he used to go to Jim Forger's recitals all the time. Maybe that was an observation he got from listening to Jim. But I think the mentors are very strong first. And so when I got to Illinois, I felt that I was fairly prepared. Although, man, I was so scared out of my mind, Nathan. I can't tell you. I was 24 years old when I got that job. And I don't know how they picked me. You know, I was one of 3 finalists, and I was blessed to be there. But I think they need to hire somebody young and cheap. You know, that was probably what it was. But I feel honored that they put enough faith to do that, and that drove me harder. But I think one of the most important experiences I had was uh, the competition experiences that I had leading up to that, because I knew the amount of work it took. Because I didn't win every competition.
Sure.
Uh-uh. No, I came in second many times. I came in third. I didn't come in any place at times. And I won. I was able to have some success. Deb Moriarty, who's the Professor Forge's wife and the head of our piano department, was also a coach of mine here, and she coached. She helped coach me for Concert Arts Guild the year I won it in the first year. In the first year, actually, she worked with me. It was the year that I reached the finals, but I didn't place or anything, so that was fine. And she said, and I came back and I remember her telling me. She says, "Well, for every 20 competitions you do, and if you place in one competition, that's a success. And don't forget it." And my wife Janet says this always: it's only that person's opinion on that one day. And I'm like, oh, okay. And it could turn out. I tell my kids, I'm glad you won this competition, or I'm sorry it didn't work out for you this time. But don't forget, it's just these three people's opinion on that one day, and then the next day it's going to be better, or maybe not. But you just keep working harder. But those are some of the musical challenges that I had that kept me going. And then when I got to Illinois, watching my colleagues work, and I was fortunate to have a mentor, to become in a mentor program. As a young faculty member, a lot of us have these. I don't know if you have them. Do you have them at Stephen F. Austin, a faculty mentoring program? They're so valuable. And for those of you out there who are just starting teaching, if you don't have a faculty mentoring program that you're part of, please ask your director if you can get involved in one, if there's any possibility that you can be assigned a mentor who would be of benefit for you to navigate certain things in your teaching or in your administrative duties of what you're doing. And Howard Klug, professor of clarinet at University of Illinois, now he's professor of clarinet at Indiana,
Right.
was my mentor. And he was fantastic. He was absolutely amazing. That was a person that I was able to understand the ins and outs of when to go to the administration and ask for extra funds for, a new instrument, a new baritone saxophone, or more scholarship money, or a graduate assistant. I didn't have a graduate assistant when I started Illinois. When I started Illinois, there were 4 saxophone majors.
Wow.
4 saxophone majors. Willis Coggins was the saxophone professor, and I'm sure he was a wonderful teacher and professor in his time, but he unfortunately let that program, it just kind of petered out at 4. And I got there. I remember in the interview I said, "So how many, how big is your class?" I came from a class of like 15, 20 that Jim Forger had at Michigan State, and they said, "Well, we might have 3 or 4 next year. We're not quite sure." And I'm like,
Wow.
and that's when I started directing the jazz. I had been directing jazz bands as a TA at Michigan State for a couple years, and I had also some jazz experience. Taught a little jazz, but mainly classical at Olivet College during my graduate school, and for a couple years. But really, Howard was able to help me manage that load of, okay, what do you do for recruitment? Okay, well, the university has a continuing extension in public service. You go see Dan Perino over in that office, and you talk about places you want to go and do clinics. And so my trumpet colleague Mike Tuttle and I and Fritz Kinzig, who's a tuba professor now down at Michigan, a couple Fridays a month, 3 Fridays a month, we'd go out and do clinics up in Chicago. Get in the car, go up, get some good food, hit 3 high schools, organize these high schools. How did I do that? Well, I had Fritz and Mike to help me. They were a couple years in front of me. And Howard Klug had done this because he had built a clarinet dynasty at Illinois. And he had clarinet students lying down past my hall. And every time I walked down the hall, I'm like, yeah, I want to have my saxophonists sound like Howard's clarinetists.
Right.
So that was, to answer Stephen's question, that's really important. Other musical things that, for me, When I was at Illinois and here at Michigan State, uh, after I left Illinois and went back to Michigan State, I was really blessed with a lot of opportunities to play with the band, play with the orchestra, at, where they would ask you to play as a young faculty member. They, local symphony, CU Symphony, those were wonderful things. I think I played with the band 5 concertos in 7 years.
Wow.
And I kind of felt bad about that because, here are my other colleagues. But Jim Curnow, and then after Jim, Jim Keane, they were really, really supportive of saxophone and what we were doing. We were able to get those 4 majors up to about 20 majors in about 2 or 3 years, and then the quality, gradually came along. I got a graduate assistantship. I see Sheila as one of my first graduate assistants is watching here. Sheila Nevius, Sheila Connor. She came over from Lynn Clock Studio. And so it was a whole, Howard helped me figure out, how do you recruit? How do you do these things? And where do I go to get that? And then at Michigan State, John Whitwell, who's from your neck of the woods down there in Dallas, and the band director there, and of course Ken Bloomquist and Kevin Sedito now, my wonderful colleague here. We've done so many projects. So I have to say, my association with my band colleagues, and then have helped. And I mentioned Fritz Kinzig. Fritz got me involved with the wonderful organization you're with now, St. Louis Symphony, where I played with St. Louis as their principal saxophonist from '86 to '97. And then that spawned other journeys to Minnesota Orchestra, and then Cleveland Orchestra, Chicago Symphony, and others. So those are some pivotal points. I guess another point in my career would have been when I did the Dow Concerto with Cleveland. That was a really special time. I think that all happened with a mutual, somebody talks to somebody else, you know how this goes, and you all do. And they say, I think Cleveland was looking for saxophonists to celebrate Ingolf Dahl's work at the Ojai Festival.
Okay.
And it was supposed to happen in 2003, and it didn't happen for a couple of years later because of whatever, tour arrangements they had to make with the orchestra and whatnot. But they had called me up. I got this call out of the blue. I just finished a lesson, and I got a call at 5 o'clock at night. This is so-and-so from Cleveland Orchestra. We'd like to talk to you, Joe Lulloff. Do you know who he is? Every time I answer the phone, my voice is much higher than normal, and I sound like a probably a secretary or something. But yeah, and apparently Gary Foster, great jazz saxophonist who I had played with my big bands at Illinois when I was teaching the third band there. Gary had had mentioned me to Dan Higgins. And I maybe Dan was supposed to do the gig and he couldn't or didn't want, and who knows what happened. But I know that a couple of those guys were involved, and I always just felt really lucky to be involved. And so that was another wonderful opportunity that helped me I guess kind of get involved, get to that next step in my career.
Right.
There's these different types of little stepping stones that aren't stepping stones. They're big plateaus, but you have to keep looking for that next one.
Sure. And
composers are really important for us to work with, and I think those people, that group of musicians, it's such a wonderful collaboration, two-way street that we can have with them.
Right. And
we can talk about that if you like, but
yeah, absolutely.
But those are some of my defining moments. And there's others. I mean, playing with Air Force Band and the Navy Band and other things, travels that I've taken. Wonderful summer I had touring with Prism Quartet, filling in for Tim Reese as Tim was doing I don't know what he was playing. I can't remember what gig he had, but it was a pretty big gig, Rolling Stones or something.
I think, yeah.
Yeah, and so I got a chance to play Albright with that quartet, and Tamor Sullivan, who had just graduated from Michigan State with me, was in the quartet, and so that's how, that kind of happened, and to be involved with that great organization for a short period of time was great, and Capitol Quartet, that came about, and that's been a really great brotherhood, if you would to say, of just wonderful people that inspire me as well. Those guys, Henning and Henning Schroeder and Dave Stambler and Chris Krevston. I mean, who couldn't be inspired by those people? And
Right.
and my students, so.
Sure, of course. And so, I guess one of the names that you mentioned, which everybody should know, and I hope that they do. You mentioned Dan Higgins.
Yes.
What a phenomenal talent! You were talking about Don Fabian with doubling earlier. Dan Higgins, this just an amazing musician, and I mean one of the most versatile and multi-talented people you could ever possibly meet. And he's in fact, he was the guy who was on the John Williams Catch Me If You Can.
Right. He did that. And Gary had told me a little bit about that session once. I was visiting with him out in California, and he said everybody was just in awe of Dan's ability to go back and forth between styles, and that's what has made him one of the top first call studio musicians.
Right.
I've never had the privilege of meeting him. I so much want to.
Yeah.
But I will do that. That's on my bucket list. Get through this virus time, maybe go out to California and look him up.
Right.
But go ahead.
No. I was just mentioning that was the name that you mentioned, and Sheila. Shout out to Sheila. I actually met Sheila this summer at Snow Pond. This past summer, she came.
Seriously? Oh yeah.
With the Cornerstone Quartet.
Oh yes. Uh-huh.
And I met them and had a wonderful time visiting them. So yeah, there's it's a small world for sure. And so it was nice to hear.
And we always remind our students that, don't we?
Yeah.
It's a small world. It's a small world.
Yeah.
And we have to remember that on so many different levels.
Yes. So speaking of students, one of the questions that was asked was, how do you teach or address tone color and musicality?
Oh, that's a good question. I think when you start listening to the saxophone a lot, you start hearing. Of course, there's so many different tones out there that we have, but we find some people that we love the tone color of, and we start to listen and say, oh, I want to sound like, for me it was, again, I don't mean to keep bringing him up, but Jim Forger, it was just the way it was. However, as I kept going on, and actually it was, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was unearthing some recordings of mine here, and because I'm trying to get my office set here at home, and I was listening to the recordings, the ones to keep and the ones to throw away. And the throwaway pile was getting pretty big. But I just remember, I listened to how my tone kind of developed, and I thought about this. I kept thinking, well, it does, it had, you hear some Jim Forger in it, but it doesn't have Jim Forger in it. Right?
Sure.
It goes to show that we're all unique individuals, and we have certain kinds of dimensions in our oral cavity shape, but more so, it's the connection of what we listen to and what we're influenced by on a daily basis.
Right.
And maybe monthly and yearly basis, where we have gone with our listening. I always like to suggest. I remember when iPods first came out, and I always used to say, I'd like to take a look at the students' iPods, probably against against FERPA or whatever it is. I want to see your last 25 played before your lesson.
Right.
And I guarantee you that most of those last 25s had nothing to do with the classical saxophone. Maybe so though. A lot of my students, now I think we can get tone color from all the pop music we listen to, and really kind of be influenced that way. At least it influences how we hear things. But listening a lot to, for me, it was listening first of all, I had to have a kind of a solid sense of my tone color. So it was listening a lot to, pardon me, to Jim Forger back then. When I talk about saxophones, to listen to Donald Cinta was big for me, but more so Forger and Rousseau probably for me. I don't want to put anything in any ranked order because it just depended on what the piece I was listening for. It's the listening aspect of what we listen to really. First of all, is the foundation basis of that. But more so than just saxophone, it's other instruments. Voice, other types of violinists, clarinetists. Heinz Hollinger came to Michigan State. My sophomore or junior year, and he did a residency, and he played Marcello Oboe Concerto. And so I prepared Marcello Oboe Concerto, and I had, I had his sound. I never had a lesson with him, but I had his sound in my mind.
Right.
And I got the recording, and so I listened to it. And, my teacher said, yeah, you're starting to get some oboe colors into that. And that made me think, oh, okay, that, it's the old adage. We listen to something long enough, maybe we are able to connect onto it too.
Right.
For me, I'm a huge, huge jazz buff, much to probably the detriment of other genres of music that I'm sorely deficient in. And you can talk to my son and my wife. I can tell the Beatles, but I would not pass a Beatles class, just because I mean I enjoy it, but I don't gravitate to it. When I go and turn on my music here, I don't know. I have about 1,500, about 1,000 or 800 jazz,
Yeah.
CDs. I'll pick one of those,
Well,
I think for me it's kind of listening to Johnny Hodges or for vibrato, listening to Dexter Young for sort of a relaxation of shaping of line and certain tonal aspects, and it's getting that kind of getting the sound in your ear of what you want something to sound like.
Sure.
In your own voice before you play it, and you balance that with, if you're working on a piece, what is the character of the piece? What is the piece? What's the history of the piece? What's the tradition of the piece? Do we have to sound exactly like Marcel Mule when we play Caprice in form de valse, or can we make it our own? How much of our own can we make it versus how much do we, and that definitely goes into transcriptions.
Sure.
If you're doing Barrio, how much do we play it like any of the clarinet artists? I can't think of the young lady who I can't think of her name right now, who made that very popular back in the 80s, who I like recording of. But how do we listen? How much do we go there, and how much do we put a little vibrato in, and how much do we change the color of the sound? So that's the first thing with tone color. And then the second thing was in listening particularly to jazz artists for me, is how they changed and manipulated sound color with either false fingerings and particularly I think with throat opening. And I think for me it was the more colorful players. I don't want to say it that way, but the players that really brought the tone color here and again, my teacher and maybe Cinta and those guys. I mean, a lot of overtone work really came as a basis of that ability to do that.
Sure.
So doing a lot of overtone matching, exercises, playing a note and then matching that particular note with an overtone that doesn't have any undertones associated with adjusting your throat to be in your tongue position, particularly to be able to match as much the pitch and the color of the note as possible, and then trying to, if your note sounds a little thin or pinched or something, trying to bring some of that, and you can get that overtone, trying to bring that overtone close to pitch and trying to mesh, shall I say, each feeling of each note, more so the overtone note into the regular note.
Right.
And that kind of exercise, a lot of those exercises, and those are really brought about in the Donald Cinta's voicing,
Hmm.
and his book, voicing, and I go back to Sigurd Roscher's top tones,
Yeah.
and particularly more recently, a lot of top tones for me, and doing those scales at the end of the top tones, and
Yes.
pages 13 through 18. For those of you who don't know it, go get top tones and do pages 13 through 18.
I've got it on my stand over there.
I've got it. I'm happy to, happy to say that I've been doing those on a pretty regular basis here, and I do, and I have my students do that, and that's the first thing. You have to get the flexibility and the ear to work as a saxophonist, and then from there you need to have a wide array of listening um, heroes, basically.
Yeah.
And, on your recently played 25 recently played list, have several that you're listening to this artist, you're listening to this artist for something, you're listening to this artist for something. Could be a trombonist for fullness of sound. It could be a euphoniumist for the vibrato. Boy, they have beautiful vibrato sometimes if you get the right guy. Leonard Falcone, oh my gosh, I used to stand outside of his office and listen to him practice. His vibrato was like syrup.
Yeah.
And that was, and I'd stand outside my teacher's office sometimes and listen to. So that's how I approach a little bit of the tone color, at least as from listening aspect, and then also trying to relate what character is the music asking you for. You talked about Deborah Richtmeyer. She did a master class here. Too long ago. We need to have her come back. But she did a wonderful master class, and she was working with one of my students on vibrato. And she said, "What's the character you're trying to feel? Tell us a little bit. And what mood are you interested in portraying here with that character? Because vibrato is mood."
Yeah.
And I never thought of it that way. And I always think of that. It's those little nuggets for me that help me then that trigger something with tone color.
Right.
But be imaginative, and put words to your music. And put feelings to your music, and that might help a little bit too, along with the physical things.
Right. So, and I think the other important thing to remember is that it's an ever evolving pursuit. And what you're interested in, and what sound. I think the first time I heard you play was at the Tucson conference, and you did the Mazlenka concerto.
Yeah, that we premiered the Mazlanka. Yeah, that was an interesting story.
Yeah, that was kind of a last switch, wasn't it?
Well, it was an unfortunate story because Kellen Thomas, one of my former students, Kellen did his undergraduate with me at Illinois, and then moved with me to Michigan State. And he was a high school student of mine as well. And Kellen was the talent. He was a kind of a guy that he'd memorize an etude a week as a senior in high school every once in a while. He'd go for these stretches of memorizing etudes. Like, how do you do that? It's one of those freaks, I think. But just such a talented person. Well, unfortunately, he came down with dystonia.
Oh.
And I mean, it's well known. It was it's a well known thing now, and he's very successful teaching out east now in another field. But he still plays, and he can play jazz and salsa music. He was, oh my gosh, he was such a talent in playing salsa music, tenor and baritone. Oh, such rhythm.
Yeah.
And but he was just having difficulties managing the voicing and whatnot on that concerto.
Yeah.
And this was back in 2000, and so I got a call 3 weeks before and asked if I could do this piece. And David Mazlanka is a Michigan State grad and would come up all the time. His son, Matthew, would have euphonium lessons right next door to my studio with Phil Cinder. And so I'd see David a lot, and I think, so it was kind of an interesting connection. But that's how that piece came about, and that was a very emotional performance for me.
Yeah. Well, and so I knew that it was a last minute prep for you, but I wasn't aware, but I guess what I was saying was that remembering you you're playing from then and listening to your older recordings, you sound very different now than you did before. And that's, as you're as you evolve as a player and you start to listen for different things, it's, as you said, it's a product of who you're listening to and what you're thinking about at that point. Your sound changes and it moves from one thing to the other. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about sound is that it's a reflection of where you are at that point.
Well, thank you. I need a better read always, though. Give me a good read, right? Is that not the case for all of us? If we can have a good read, we can do anything we need, right?
That's right. But
Well, I agree with you. I think our road experiences, the more you do, the more things change. And let's forget about this dark and light, divide. It's not. I mean, what is that? It's what works for you and what's exactly right in your mind when we start talking about tonal color, of a dark tonal color and a lighter or brighter.
right. And well, and that's the thing. And of course you sounded beautiful then, and you sound beautiful now. And it's just it's this thing where there's an expressive range that we have, that we're always kind of exploring as musicians, and that's I just think that's actually one that stands out to me as an example of you have a sound range, so to speak, and then within that you move around depending on where you're.
Well, I thank you for the thought, and that's very kind. I appreciate the observation. But I also want to add, a large part of my development, and I think of anybody's development, if we're really teaching well, the right way and well, comes from our students.
Mm-hmm.
Because you've had some outstanding students, I've had some outstanding students. We all have had these wonderful, outstanding students. They're sitting here. They're all over the screen here, and and I don't mean to make this as a big love fest or anything. That's not what I'm talking about. What I mean is when you come out of a lesson and I hear a student, in a master class, at Florida State or at Stephen F. Austin or wherever it is, and they're playing Detroit Steel like nails, At Great Plains Saxophone Workshop, I had just sweated through the Great Plains through learning Detroit Steel. This is a David Biedenbender work that we're recording this summer, hopefully later this summer. I hope.
Yeah.
One of my goals. It's a great piece. It's very difficult, and I'm like, oh gosh, and I played it, and whatever, it's good. Always have these little things you want. And this young man comes and plays, and just nails it. Nothing. And I'm like, cool, this is great. Went back into the practice room. There's a couple little things he did I'm working on.
Right.
I love that. And it happens to be constantly with my kids. I'm sure with your kids. I've got kids that just kicking me in the where just to do this. And that keeps me teaching. And I think that keeps us growing. At least keeps me growing as a musician. And I think if you stop doing that, then you stop growing as a musician.
Sure.
Because Don Cinta said to me at my graduate audition, he says, you know why you should come to Michigan? I said, well, I can study with you. I want to study with you. He says, well, no, that's not the reason. You need to come to Michigan to surround yourself with people who can play better than you, play better in tune than you, play better technique than you. You just need your ass kicked. You need to come to Michigan to have people do that. That's what we do here at Michigan. And I'm like, cool. And I'll remember that. I'll really remember that. And I didn't mean to swear, but literally that was a direct quote.
Uh-huh.
And he meant it in the most, not in a bragging way.
Uh-huh.
Not in a bragging way. He meant that in an inspirational way. He meant that this is what really happens.
Right.
Now, it happened that way too at Michigan State for me, and it's happened, I know, at every other school. If you just need to surround yourself with people who inspire you.
Right.
And that's why I say what I say about my students. I say that about my quartet,
Right.
and why not?
I mean, that's I say this to my students, all the time. And I mean this in the best possible way. You learn as much from the people you're surrounded with as you do from your teachers. I mean, it's that laboratory environment where someone's playing for you and you're playing for them, and ideas of listening to things together and talking about it like that. That environment is what sparks all the growth. That's
Yeah. Yeah.
and unfortunately, that's what we're missing right now. I mean, that's the huge part of it that's gone, is that collegiality.
Yeah.
So, well, anyway, there were a few more questions that I wanted to ask you. I also don't want to take up your whole evening here.
Well, I don't want everybody to I understand it's a beautiful day here in Michigan. It's finally 52 degrees and we see the sunshine. But I'm happy to be here. I'm sorry if I go on and on, but hopefully we've been able to.
Please, this is why we're here. So, this also is from Stephen. Thanks. Warm-ups are great, but professionals know that sometimes you just literally can't do one full one before a gig. How do you prepare for that?
Yeah, it's called the musical bank you have inside yourself. Okay, and hopefully everybody's been doing warm-ups and long tones and 30 minutes at least a day before you have a 2, 3, 4, 5 hour practice session, maybe even 40 minutes a day. Hopefully everybody's doing that from day one, from high school career or even before. I used to do a lot of warm-ups when I first started playing. That was the only way I could get my asthma kind of controlled sometimes, because my asthma was really bad. And so I did a lot of long tones. It's kind of weird at 8 and 9 years old. You think that my mind would go somewhere else. But I just I stared out and I'm not sure I was thinking about the right things, but I was trying to think about breathing. And that's, I think for me, I've done a lot of warm-ups way back that when I don't have that time, I go through a certain kind of, I have a scale routine that I do, which is like do octaves. I just go up chromatically in octaves.
Uh-huh.
And just do it slowly first, and then after doing long tones and overtone matchings, and I'll do it maybe just if just for 5 minutes if I don't have a lot of time to do it for 20, and I'll do it sometimes quietly, if it's before rehearsal or something. I know what I have to do, and it helps get my mind through it, and then I might change that. I might do it on minor thirds roots, C major up, E flat down, F sharp major up, all the way into the altissimo. And I'll practice a lot of things slow, because I think sometimes we think about that, we have to get our technique warmed up and ready to go. Well, yes, in partially that, but our mind needs to think about things slow so we can process it a little more. So I'll do a lot of slow passages if I'm working on same as Lanka concerto. I'll do that. That third movement or whatever it was, just some of that really tricky altissimo stuff, very slow. Other than that, though, overtone matching and a little bit of mouthpiece exercises, just trying to get the air right. Getting my embouchure set and ready to go. That's what I have to do. And sometimes, I'm playing jazz. I'll just do some jazz heads just to try to get me in that spirit. I may have a separate setup, and I have a separate everything for it.
Sure.
I'm not mixing, and I'm fortunate enough to be able to do that. I have to go that way all the way to the different horn, or else it just doesn't work. But that it's really tough, isn't it? But we did our long tones, our 15 minutes of long tones and articulation exercises, maybe and possibly some, I call them Elsa Verdera warm up patterns. 1 2 3 2 1 2 3 4 3 2 3.
Sure.
Little warm up exercises. And sometimes I'll just do I think Tim McAllister had a scale warm-up exercise that I got one time from my students or something. I've borrowed that. I think that came from Cinta. I can't remember. I don't know if it was Tim or Cinta, but you know, and Jim Forger has one, and sometimes I'll just plug into each one of these, and they take 5 minutes to do, and then you're there. You're
Yeah.
ready.
Do you ever use this book, the Taffin Gobert? Do you know this one?
Yes, yes, I know that. No, I haven't. I should check that out.
I like it because it was kind of what you're referring to as the Elsevier exercises. It just starts, you know, tetrachords all the way up, you know, going
Yeah,
forth. Of course, you can expand it for saxophone range, you know, that
yeah,
will be flat, but um,
yeah, yeah. That's a great. I've heard people talk about that. That's a great book. The jazz musician in me just tends to make those things up.
right,
You
sure,
know, and so I'm doing different types of chordal patterns, seventh chords, nine chords, or chromatic types of little things. So I just tend to improvise a
sure.
couple, 3, 4 licks a day, and then there I am. But I think I should check that out. I need to do that.
It's a good one, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so, you know, if anybody has, I see we've got a couple of questions in there, but if anybody else has any extra questions, I've got one more prepared, and then we can take some from the group. But the what is it like to have a saxophone family? So, you know, obviously Janet, saxophonist, you are saxophonist, Jordan, saxophonist. Um, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh my. Well, it's a blessing, I think, and for me, it's a blessing because uh, I don't know. I just think that it could be a curse too. I'm sure maybe my wife and Jordan would say it's a curse, but but uh, but uh, but no. Growing up with saxophone in my now it's 50 years as a saxophonist. I don't know. I think it's something I didn't plan on. Let me tell you that. And Janet and I met in school. She was a woodwind specialist, a band director for 5 years before she got to master's school at Michigan State and got her woodwind specialist degree. She's a wonderful teacher, just a terrific teacher, and very, very fine saxophonist. I think wonderful. But her specialty now is teaching younger students. She still plays a lot in Lansing Concert Band, and she'll play in the symphony here, you know, occasionally when we have symphony stuff. Um, uh, but and then of course she started Jordan out, and Jordan wanted to play the saxophone. We didn't force him to play the saxophone. I think I I I have a funny picture. I'll show you. This is he'll kill me, but that's okay. You know, this I don't know if you can see this picture. That's Jordan when he was like a month, maybe days old. And Eric Satterley at Meridian Winds had given us this little saxophone that we put in his hands and took a picture, never thinking that he would, you know, decide to make a career living at it. And so he's. I can just say I'm really proud of my family. I'm really proud of everything that they do. And the other thing is that they understand the sacrifices that musicians make because they're making those sacrifices, one for themselves when they have to do certain projects and they of course understand the sacrifices made when I'm gone and when I was on tour, when I was, you know, not home, when Jordan, you know, was doing something and I you know, wanted to be home. And we would travel and we would do musical things and it became wonderful, I think, to celebrate everybody's musical accomplishments. I mean, when I played with an orchestra gig or when I played, Janet and I would play big band gigs in Detroit or Flint or wherever it was, you know, shows that would come through, you know, the those types of show things here in Lansing. Jordan would come along, he'd get to see what the professional life was like. I used to do a jazz gig here at Coral Gables. I booked jazz here for 10 years. It's a restaurant. And I had my own jazz trio quartet with some really fine musicians. And Jordan would sit there in the audience, and Jan would come, and we'd have friends, and they'd have dinner, and you know, it was a supper club, you know. But we played pretty straight ahead jazz. And they come to concerts at Michigan State, or you know, and I mean, Janet's holding Jordan, you know, when he was a baby in in the recording booth while I'm sitting there playing something. So I think that ability for them to grow up, for Jordan to grow up around that musical family and around really wonderful people, all my colleagues and my students who really took an interest in him, and maybe that's what happened when he decided to take the saxophone. He saw this family that, I mean, we work really hard to be a family. I'm proud of my saxophone family. Always have been. I mean, it's kind of a unique culture, I think, that I know it exists in everywhere, and I'm sure there are wonderful families in everywhere, but I think that's one of the keys to the success for a successful studio, is to have a nurturing and supportive saxophone family that goes beyond just the students in that, when they start to interact with others around them. And Jordan, I think, really benefited from that. And I'm just proud of him, everything he's done with Noise Quartet. I mean, that's a quartet that's just burning it out there on the trail. They're really setting, I think, they're setting the standard very high, and they're defining their music in a specific way, which I love. And there's another group that Jordan has called Dial Up Stepmom, with Julian Valesco, former friend of mine, and Nick Zulik, who's Nick now is now in Chicago, and was at Bowling Green there with John Simpson. They're playing pop covers and other types of things as a saxophone trio, and they're really defining kind of a different style of music that's unique. I'm really excited about that. But Jordan is my best friend and my son, who I love, as Janet is too. My wife, who I love, of course. But they give me advice. They steer me correctly. They tell me if I should post something on social media or if I shouldn't ever post that on social media. Thus, I don't post too much. I don't want to come off heavy-handed or whatnot. And they tell me, and I mean, they give me advice. Jordan has helped me many times on saxophone equipment. He knows the kind of sound concept I want. He knows the person who I am, and it's really great. And I had the privilege of working with him for 5 years here at State, and I will just tell you, that was his decision. It was not my decision to come to State. So I feel really, really very lucky and blessed that I had that time with him as a saxophone teacher slash father, and we were able to separate it, and we had things in place at Michigan State that could help and support that, with the grading and so on and so forth.
Right.
But and Jordan and I just played. I think we're going to post this up on my YouTube channel, and I guess Facebook or whatever it is. Our performance of the Jordan Goodefin, a double concerto for saxophone band we did with the Air Force Band last year. I did a featured concert with him, and I asked them if Jordan could come, because Jordan won that competition back 10 years back or so, won a high school competition, and it was so special to collaborate with him on that. We found this duet that Claude and Brantford did, and it's a cool piece. I hope people do it. But we were supposed to play it here at Michigan State this coming week, and unfortunately it's not going to happen. So we're going to post that as an anniversary and hopefully do it next year at some point.
Sure.
But I have to say it's really neat, and it helps me grow as a musician. So I remember, there's so many great saxophone people, colleagues. Fred Hemke, for one. When Jordan went and auditioned for Fred Hemke, Fred said, "You know what you're getting in for." He said, "Son, you know what you're getting in for with your dad." And we've taken great pains. I want Jordan to define himself. If I say anything on this interview, this is most important. I really want, and Jordan has done this. You want your students, you want to define themselves in their own right, as far as their playing and their abilities and that. Particularly when it's your son, you want him or your daughter, per se, if this was ever to happen, if you had a daughter that played saxophone, you want them to define themselves in their own right as their own person, as their own artist, it's very, very important.
Mhm.
And so I've learned a lot, and I've had to step back a little bit, and I've learned from Fred, talking a little bit with him. I learned from John Nickel, and I've learned from who John Nickel is another wonderful saxophonist who has a wonderful saxophone son at University of Oklahoma, my former student too, Jonathan. And so I'm constantly learning how to make sure there's that's a fine line of definition.
Right, right. So we have a question here. Kevin typed this in, I think, early on, talking about Milwaukee and referencing Hemke's autobiography. Discuss how high quality the music and music education programs were in Milwaukee when he was young, and you had also mentioned that too. Sorry, was it still that way when you were growing up, and what made that area so unique or special?
Yeah, it was. And I think it was that way probably until the mid 80s.
Mm-hmm.
I think partially it was the leadership of the schools and the political climate back then, as far as a lot of a lot of support was given from taxes and whatnot to be able to operate and so on and so forth. We had a lot of community colleges that in the area, Concordia College. Oh my gosh, my mind is escaping me. UW Milwaukee, of course. MAT, Milwaukee Area Technical College, where while they were colleges that really helped define you in other disciplines, arts was so important to them. It was also an area that was a very diverse ethnic area, where you had a lot of cultures coming together, a lot of music coming together, a lot of little summer festivals that featured their music. They have this thing called Summerfest, which is a huge music festival back when I was young, and I think still going on the lakefront. Well, the arts really then started, that festival kind of spawned these other local festivals that music would show up at. So you'd have a lot of opportunity to play jazz. A lot of symphony musicians were musicians that came up, or lots of concert series were made by musicians that came up from Chicago, and played and gig up, and still do it today, I think. And I think the symphony is very, very strong, extremely strong. What really made it, though, probably in thinking through that question now, is really the high schools, and we had just great band directors at that time. H. Bob Reynolds was at Wisconsin there for a while.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think he was. That's what my memory serves me correctly. Early on, in like around 70, but there was a lot of great band directors that came out of University of Wisconsin-Madison, and of course Northwestern with John Painter, and that area I think really benefited musically as well. Also, you had G.C. LeBlanc Music Company in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and they, that was a big draw. That was my first saxophone, was a LeBlanc. So I used to go down Kenosha, and before I got a buffet, after I got my second saxophone, sorry, after my buffet. But so there's a lot of industry there, and I think it's really a good city for the arts.
Sure. And this is a question from Roy Allen, and he says, he asks, what was one of the best moments of your professional career and one of the lowest moments of your career?
I have too many best moments because I've been really blessed with a lot of them, and I try to forget the lowest moment.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, you're gonna put me on the spot, Roy. I see it right there too. Thank you. The best moment of my career. There's so many of them, but probably that I have many, and I don't want to be sensitive about this, and this is really the truth. The true best moment has been playing with my son. It's really the best. Mm-hmm. I've had some wonderful opportunities to play with different orchestras and travel the world. And music. When you play with Cleveland, or I was just in Uzbekistan this last fall, those are places you travel to. You meet people. Or with Great Plains Saxophone Workshop, we go to Cortona and we teach. Those are wonderful musical moments. And John playing with John Nickel and Yulian Tay, my pianist collaborators, and Deborah Moriarty, June Okada. Those have been some very special moments for me. But really, over and above, not because he's my blood, when we play any music together, particularly this last April, when we played that concert, for me, I will never, ever, it's such a hard, I will never forget it. It's such a hard experience to describe the emotions of that.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. That makes, I mean, it's, as it is hard, of course, to sit there and say, boom, this is, the one thing. Because but that.
And I will tell you one last thing. To answer the other part of the question, the lowest moment. I think the lowest moment in my music career, I do remember some dark times. It wasn't that I was worried about getting a job or anything, but and it really sounds funny. I just remember one time being extremely embarrassed and upset with myself walking out of a saxophone lesson with Jim Fortune. I think I might have been a junior or a sophomore at the end of my, sometime, probably it's my sophomore year, that I just didn't practice enough. I didn't practice that much at all that week, and I could tell that I'd had other homework and that, but I could have practiced. I really could have practiced. I know I could have. I think maybe I sloughed it off. Maybe I was hanging out with my girlfriend at the time or something. I don't know what it was. And I should have practiced more. And I came out, and he kind of gave me a tough lesson and kind of got on my case, and this and that. And then I had a bad rehearsal in symphony band or something like that before that. And I cried, and I was just like, I can't let this happen. This is not going to happen. It will never happen again. I make mistakes. I make tons of mistakes, but not like this. So being prepared for my teacher, because I let him down, and in letting in letting him down, I really let myself down. I really so I never want to let myself down on any performance, because if I can make sure I'm as prepared as possible, then I've done the best job, and hopefully good things will happen. So, but
no, that's that makes a lot of sense. I was going to say, it's you over the course of a career, it's always easier for me to say, oh, this one time, like I wasn't prepared for that. I mean, in school we all have memories of certain things like that. It's that's an indelible imprint that leaves, that you learn a lesson from.
I have to tell you one quick thing that kind of reminded me of this, and this is something that I need to do more, and I haven't done, but I listened to a video online the other night. Honestly, it's about 3 nights ago. I was doing I was working in selling some stuff in our basement, and I turned on that Jazz on the Tube. I told you that that daily thing. I had a podcast that it was the Duke. It was the Joel Temperley Day, and they had the Joel Temperley concert that the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra did, and it featured Joel Temperley, great baritone saxophonist, all his works, and Wynton Marsalis was introducing Joel and saying what was one of the things that was most memorable about Joel, because several people in the band wrote pieces for Joel Temperley, and Joel was playing the gig, and it was a really special concert. You all should check it out. It's Joel Temperley Day on this particular blog, or I don't know what you call it, but email. And Wynton said one of the things that really he'll always take away from working with Joel Temperley over these past several years is that Joel would be the first guy at the gig. Now, we've always heard this story. You're the first guy at the gig and the last guy to leave, right? It's being like the first at the party and the last to leave? No. He was the first guy at the gig, warming up on baritone saxophone and bass clarinet, making sure he had his reeds together, making sure everything was perfect. He was there for 30 minutes before every rehearsal. every gig. And he was asked why he was this. He says, because I'm so blanky nervous every time I play. I want to make sure my nerves calm down and I can play the best I can. And so that's another thing that I've still, I mean, I'm prepared and ready to go, but I can always be a little better.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think that's all the questions we have. So I just want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your Saturday to visit with all of us and for giving us so much great information.
Well,
We appreciate it.
well, thank you very much. I want to thank you. First of all, wish everybody a very, very safe and healthy time. I really hope that you are all doing well and that you're not dealing any way, shape, or form with this horrible sickness that we this pandemic that we are experiencing. And please stay safe and stay your 6 feet away and maybe even make it 8 feet. Why not?
Yeah.
A couple feet more doesn't matter. But be safe, but also be happy, take care of yourselves, and reach out to your musicians friends, and all your friends for that matter. But reach out to everybody and just check in with them and see how they're doing. Play a tune for them on Skype or on Zoom or something. Why not? I had the best time here this afternoon. I was a little nervous, I'll tell you that. So I apologize to you all if I just went on and on. But I think brevity is not my strong suit. But I really, really am honored and appreciate everything you've done, Nathan, to make me feel so at home and everybody else. And thank you for doing this wonderful service. And I'm wishing all of you guys the best of luck. And I hope all of our paths will cross soon. And keep in touch.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Take care.
Take care.